Promote. Matagal na yun, sir.
Pwede na. Hintayin ko muna si Senator Son. Oh, andyan na. Okay. Okay. The 49th session of the Senate in the second regular session of the 17th Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Win Gatchalian will lead the chamber in prayer.
Sa likod niyo. Let's bow down our heads and pray. Heavenly Father, as your humbly servants, where we are all gathered here as a community in praise of your holiness, we are most grateful for the opportunity to serve our fellow men as we implore your continuous guidance and provision for greater wisdom, courage, and understanding. Make us instruments of your divine will to stand for what is good and right, to speak for what is true and just, and to pursue action in accord to our common aspirations. As we raise this prayer, as we beseech your protection especially for our kababayans affected by the calamity brought by Mount Mayon's eruption, embrace their hearts with fortitude and resilience to withstand this difficult stage of their lives. Touch them so they may see hope and feel our love and support for them. At the same time, we pray for the marginalized and the oppressed, the abused and the disadvantaged, and for those who are lost and the needy. May our actions and decisions help alleviate their conditions as we perform our duties as their representatives and servants. Amen.
Amen. The Mandaluyong Chamber Singers will lead us in the singing of the Philippine National Anthem. The group will also render a song entitled Lipad ng Pangarap. Thank you to the Mandaluyong Chamber Singers. Secretary, please call the roll.
The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Ontiveros, Lacson, Ligada, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Soveri, Senate President Pimentel.
With 21 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the Journal of the 48th Session, Wednesday, January 24, 2018, and consider the same as approved.
Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Mr. President, we'd like to welcome some guests in the Senate. We first would like to welcome the delegation from the Secretariat of the Senate of the Kingdom of Thailand, headed by Ms. Wantani Saipinpin, and accompanied by the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Embassy, Minister Urawadi Srifiromia. Also, Mr. President, the European External Action Service, Directorate General International, the Foreign Policy Instruments and Consultants, and the EU delegation to the Philippines, Mr. John Reinder Rosing, Ms. Helena Sterry, Mr. Thomas Wersing, Mr. Yuot Sandker, Mr. Peter Hadskra, Mr. Marco Mezera, His Excellency Ambassador Franz Jessen, Mr. Matthias Lentz, Mr. Jerome Riveri, Mr. Javier Prieto, Mr. Javier Canton Lamus, Ms. Maria Lampodi. Also, there are guests of Senator Subiri, Mr. President, Mayor Madsar Luong of Parang, Sulu Province, Ahmad Mukatil, the Planning Development Coordinator, and then Almedsar Hajiri from the Municipality of Lugo, Sulu. Also, Mayor Emeng Pascual of Gapan City of Nueva Ecija, Mr. President. We'd like to welcome them to the Senate.
Welcome to all of our guests, especially those coming from abroad, from our fellow ASEAN country, Thailand, and from the European Union. Welcome to all of you.
Mr. President, we'd like to greet one of our colleagues, a very happy birthday, Senator Loren Legarda, who turned 38 years old yesterday, Mr. President. So may I have a 1-minute suspension for us to be able to greet her?
Session is suspended for us to greet the Senator.
Mr. President, we're ready to resume.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I will not accede to the request of the minority leader that I strike off the record what I said earlier. I will not do that, Mr. President. So I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved. Secretary, let us do the reference of business.
Message from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 22 January 2018, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. 6573, an act prohibiting hazing and regulating other forms of initiation rights of fraternities, sororities, and other organizations, and providing penalties for violation thereof, repealing for the purpose Republic Act number 8049, entitled An Act Regulating Hazing and Other Forms of Initiation Rights in Fraternities, Sororities, and Other Organizations, and providing penalties therefore.
Referred to the Committees on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, Justice and Human Rights, and Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Codes.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
I beg your indulgence, Mr. President, and the indulgence of our colleagues. May I move that we suspend with the reference of business at a later hour, Mr. President?
If there's no objection, okay, we suspend.
Thank you. Mr. President, my reason is so that we can give way to two third reading scenarios we have, Mr. President. So I move for the consideration for third reading of Senate Bill 454 under Committee Report number 7.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, may we request Secretary to read the title of the measure?
An act regulating the registration, licensure, and practice of occupational therapy, providing funds therefore and for other related purposes.
Mr. President, printed copies of the measure were distributed last January 25, 2018, thereby complying with the 3-day rule. I therefore move to vote on third and final reading Senate Bill 454 through a roll call vote.
Any objection? Hearing none, we now proceed to the roll call vote.
The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Ontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Soberi, Senate President Pimentel.
With 20 affirmative votes, 0 negative votes, Senate Bill number 454 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, I move for the consideration on third reading of House Bill 477 under Committee Report number 82.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
May we request the Secretary to read the title of the measure?
An act declaring January 23 of every year a special working holiday in the entire country to commemorate the declaration of the First Philippine Republic.
Mr. President, printed copies of the measure were distributed last January 25, 2018, thereby complying with the 3-day rule. I therefore move to vote on third and final reading House Bill 477 through a roll call vote.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved. Secretary, please conduct the roll call vote.
The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Ontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Soberi, President Pimentel.
20 affirmative votes, 0 negative votes. House Bill number 477 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President,
Senator Villanueva.
just a short manifestation of thanks. We'd like to thank our colleagues, Senate President, our Majority Floor Leader, the members of the Minority and Majority, especially the Chairperson of the Committee on Education, Senator Chis Escudero, for sponsoring the measure. Again, Mr. President, I just hope and pray that in the future, the First Philippine Republic will become part of the non-working holidays to give full opportunity to our countrymen to reflect on this very important milestone of our history that epitomize the enduring traits of the Filipino people. Courage, love for God and country, closeness and solidarity, the traits that shape our nation and continue to do so today. Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo. Maraming salamat sa lahat po ng ating colleagues.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
Scheduled for today is supposed to be is a privileged speech to be delivered by the birthday girl, Mr. President. But in lieu of the privileged speech, may we just manifest that Senator Legarda's speech be submitted to the Senate. It's an after-trip report on the 26th annual meeting of the Asia-Pacific Parliamentary Forum held on January 18 to 21, where Senator Legarda was the lone parliamentarian who represented the Philippines. So I move that the privileged speech be inserted into the records as part of today's proceedings.
Let it be so inserted.
May I move for a few minutes of suspension to accommodate an invitation by the Senator Legarda to the Senator's Lounge. She celebrated her 48th birthday yesterday, Mr. President.
Session is suspended for a few minutes.
elected, no? Yes, so elected, no? Tama. Ano yung sabay ka? Ano?
Be ready to resume, Mr.
Session
President.
is resumed.
Mr. President, before we start with the agenda, may I move that the Senate President designate the following members as bicameral conference committee members for House Bill 5792 and Senate Bill 1533, the conflicting provisions, an act institutionalizing the Balik Scientist Program and appropriating funds therefore. Senator Bam Aquino as chair and members Binay, Ejercito, Gordon, and Pangilinan, Mr. President.
The aforementioned senators are so designated as members of the Senate panel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1279 under Committee Report 21.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure on the National School Feeding Program. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we're still in the period of individual amendments. Last week, Senators Recto and Villar have already finished with their individual amendments, and clean copies of the measure were requested to be distributed to the body before we close the period of amendments. Now, unless there are some corrections to the clean copy, may I hear from the sponsor, Senator Bam Aquino, if there are. If they're not, I will move for the closure of the period of amendments.
Senator Aquino is recognized.
Yes, Mr. President, there were a number of senators that initially said that they wish to propose amendments, but upon further consultation, they have all withdrawn their intention to propose further amendments. So, Mr. President, at this point, there are no more individual amendments that are on the table.
Thank you. Then, in that case, Mr. President, I move to close the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, we close the period for amendments.
I move to approve on second reading Senate Bill 1279 under Committee Report number 21.
Any objection? Hearing none, said measure is approved on second reading.
Congratulations. Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of the Chamber, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1270 under Committee Report 212.
First, so we suspend consideration, majority
Oh,
leader?
yes, I'm
of
sorry, Mr.
Senate
President.
Bill.
I move to suspend consideration of 1279.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Now I move to resume consideration of 1270 under Committee Report 212.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure on the National Bible Day. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we are in the period of amendments. Now, I'm sorry, we already terminated the period of interpellations, so we're ready for the period of amendments. I move to open the period of individual amendments, Mr. President.
Individual.
Committee?
The minority leader is raising his hand. Minority leader, yes, you're recognized.
There are committee amendments, Mr. President, found in the committee report.
I stand corrected, Mr. President. There are amendments in the committee report. I move to open the period of committee amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none, we are now in the period for committee amendments.
May we now recognize the sponsor, Senator Pacquiao, to introduce committee amendments.
Senator Pacquiao is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. For committee amendments, on page 1, line 7, replace the word national with special working before the word holiday.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Delete the entire section 4 and renumber the succeeding sections accordingly.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
In the title, replace the word regular with special working.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
The title shall now read as follows: An act declaring the last Monday of January as National Bible Day and pronounce the same as special working holiday in every year thereafter.
Kailangan pa ba yun? And every year thereafter.
If there are no more committee amendments, I move to close the period of committee amendments, Mr. President. Move to adopt. It was already adopted.
Yes, any objection? Hearing none, approved.
I move to close the period of committee amendments, Mr. President.
Committee amendments. Yes, any objection? Hearing none, we close the period for committee amendments.
Move to open the period of individual amendments, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved. Senator Pacquiao, as sponsors recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to propose an amendment to Senate Bill number 1270. On page 1, line 7, replace the phrase special working with special non-working before the word holiday.
Any objections?
Mr. President,
Senator Drilon.
okay.
Majority Leader, yes. Majority Leader.
We have just amended that line
No, but
with the
because
committee amendments. In the committee amendments.
this is
No,
This
in the individual amendments.
Individual amendments, Mr. President.
wasn't the sponsor duty bound to move for the committee amendments now in the individual amendments? There's a change of heart
Oh,
to amend.
I see. So the
Because
minority leader.
it was part of the committee report, so
Yes, I am not objecting,
the
Mr.
sponsor
President. Just for the record.
had to move for the amendment.
I just wanted to point it out. So,
Yeah, Minority Leader,
Senator
yes, sir.
Drilon, Minority Leader.
Mr. President, the way I understand it, the sponsor of the measure, which is Committee Report 212, reporting out Senate Bill 1270, proposed as a sponsor that the special working holiday be amended so that it is now special I'm sorry,
What was the amendment?
that the committee report containing the amendment replacing the word national with special working before the word holiday was accepted and approved by the body.
Yes.
Now, the same sponsor is now proposing a new amendment. May we know if this is something that is in accordance with our rules?
Allowed.
Mr. President, I think it's allowed because this is individual amendments. That's what I read. The first one is the committee amendments, Mr. President.
Okay, so the sponsor did not, did the good sponsor vote against the committee amendment?
Yes, Mr. President, because we propose to non-working holiday, Mr. President.
No, Mr. President, the records will show that the sponsor did not object to the insertion of the phrase special working before the word holiday. In fact, he did not object to the committee report and the committee amendments. He moved for the adoption of the committee amendments. May we just know if this is allowed?
Mr. President, may I have 1 minute suspension?
Session suspended. Pagdating sa alam sa rules.
Kailan ba biniisip nila?
Yung title nga, kailangan pa ba sabihin na every year thereafter? Nisip ko nga ba? Hindi na, di ba? Ayusin na lang pagdating na sa interview.
The two of us did something illegal.
Special.
Mr. President, we're ready to resume.
Session is resumed.
Because of the situation, the answer to the minority leader is yes, it may be allowed. But nevertheless, so that we do not, we need not go into the substance itself, because I think that is the next question of the minority leader. In the meantime, we move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1270.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, we suspend the consideration of the said measure.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 192 under Committee Report 222.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
This is the measure on the handbook for OFWs Act. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we're still in the period of interpellation. So may we recognize the sponsor, Senator Manny Pacquiao, and to interpellate the minority leader, Senator Drilon.
Sponsor, Senator Pacquiao, is recognized, and the minority leader for interpellation is also recognized.
This is, with the permission of Senator Pacquiao,
Yes, Mr. President.
this measure would require the printing of handbooks. Is that how we understand it, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President.
This could be done also by executive order.
Mr. President, we want to institutionalize it, printing the handbook.
I'm sorry, sir. The question is simple. Can we also do this by executive order? Requiring
Yes,
POEA to print handbooks. We do not need a law.
yes, it can be done, Mr. President, but we want to institutionalize it.
Yes, okay. We do not see anything contrary to public policy. We do not see anything contrary to the Constitution. We do not see anything contrary to good public morals. We have no objection to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. In that case, I move to close the period of interpellations on Senate Bill 192 under Committee Report 222.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
I move to open the period of committee amendments, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, we are now in the period for committee amendments.
May we recognize the sponsor, Senator Pacquiao, to
Senator Pacquiao is recognized.
introduce the
Sponsor.
committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. On page 1, line 2, delete the year 2013 after the word of, and in lieu thereof, insert the year 2018.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 1, line 11, delete the words Filipino. No, number 2. Sorry. On page 2, on page 1, line 6, delete the words migrant worker after the word every, and in lieu thereof, insert the phrase land-based and sea-based worker free of charge.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 1, line 11, delete the words Filipino, Bisaya, and Ilocano translations after the word with, and in lieu thereof, insert the phrase translations in local language as may be necessary.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 1, line 18 and 19, delete the phrase pre-employment briefings and seminars administered by concerned agencies for migrant workers, and in lieu thereof, insert the phrase the worker education program of various agencies.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 1, line 20, delete the word comprehensive between the words A and information, and in lieu thereof, insert the word basic.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 24, insert an additional enumeration to read as E to provide necessary information for their reintegration into the Philippine society.
Any objection?
On page 2, line 16, insert the word develop between the words to and publish.
Any objection?
On page 2, line 20, delete the words receiving country between the words the and that, and in lieu thereof, insert the words countries of destination.
Any objection? Approved.
On page 2, line 23, delete the phrase to at least 3 Filipino major language, and in lieu thereof, insert the phrase in local language as may be necessary.
Any objection? Approved.
On page 2, line 27, insert word gender sensitive between the words comprehensive and pre-employment.
Any objection? Approved.
On page 2, line 28, delete the words such as between the words topics and not.
Any objection?
On page 2, line 29, delete the phrase and gender sensitivity between the words recruitment and but.
Any objection?
On page 2, line 36, after the word OWA, insert the phrase Department of Foreign Affairs, DFA, Interagency Council Against Trafficking, IACAT, Commission on Filipinos Overseas, CFO, and Maritime Industry Authority, Marina.
Any objection?
The title of the bill shall now read as an act mandating the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration o POA to develop to develop, publish, disseminate, and update a handbook on the rights and responsibilities of migrant workers, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 8042, otherwise known as the Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipino Act of 1995, as amended by Republic Act 10022.
The motion is to amend the title as read by the sponsor. Any objection? Hearing none, approved. Nothing more? Majority Leader?
No more individual amendments, Mr. President.
No more committee amendments?
No more committee amendments.
Yes. Majority Leader?
Move to close the period of committee amendments, Mr.
Any
President.
objection?
Mr. President, considering the number of amendment, well,
We just closed the period for committee amendments.
yes, I
Majority Leader.
know. I am not sure whether there are individual amendments, but considering the number of committee amendments,
Okay.
perhaps we can ask for a clean copy and take the individual amendments tomorrow, Mr. President.
So
If
Majority
that
Leader?
is agreeable to the sponsor. Okay, Mr. President, so may we so direct the Secretariat?
Yes, the Secretariat is directed to
come up with a clean copy for the guidance of our members.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 192 under Committee Report 222.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved. Majority Leader, Senator Gordon is raising his hand. Okay.
Mr. President, may we recognize Senator Richard Gordon for a manifestation?
Senator Gordon is recognized.
Just a brief manifestation, Mr. President. The caucus just a while ago at the lounge, I just wanted to make it formal that the Senate unanimously declared that Mr. Faldon, formerly of Customs, will remain charged with contempt, and he will now be remanded to the custody of the Pasay City jail upon order of commitment by the Senate President. And it was agreed upon unanimously, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
We will work on the decision that was reached earlier. Thank you, Senator Gordon.
Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1623 under Committee Report 190.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
This is the measure on the Recoverable System Laws Act, the parliamentary status of the measure. We are in the period of interpellation. So may we recognize the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Energy, Senator Win Gatchalian, and to interpellate the Minority Leader, Senator Drilon. Although, Mr. President, I have been informed by the Minority Leader that he has an appointment at 5:30. We'll have to excuse him after a few minutes, Mr. President.
So for purposes of interpellation, the sponsor, Senator Gatchalian, and the Minority Leader are both recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the gentleman sponsor yield the floor to some questions on on this period of interpellation?
Yes, Mr. President, I'll be more than happy to receive some questions, Mr. President.
Can we have the lights on this side of the...
Lights on. Let us keep the lights on.
Mr. President, this is a bill which would reduce the cap of recoverable systems loss rate, which presently is at 8.5% for private distribution utilities and 13% for the
Electric
cooperatives. Mr. President, the present caps is issued by authority of the ERC, is that correct?
Yes, Mr. President.
Now, Mr. President, in layman's terms, how do we define systems losses, just for our understanding?
Mr. President, I have a simple illustration, Mr. President.
Yes, please.
We can put up slide number 30. This is a simple illustration, Mr. President. If you're a consumer consuming rice and assuming you will buy your rice directly to from the farmers, the farmers will have to deliver, the farmers will have to use transportation to deliver the rice all the way down to the consumers. Along the way, Mr. President, grains of rice will fall because obviously the sacks are not perfect in terms of packaging. And even though there are grains of rice will fall throughout the transportation, throughout the process of delivering rice, the consumers still need to pay the entire amount of that rice that he ordered. So meaning, Mr. President, in the power sector, when the consumer avails of power, along the way, the transportation or the delivery of power, you will lose a portion of the power being delivered to the consumer. But even though, Mr. President, the consumer will still have to pay the entire value of that power ordered, Mr. President.
Okay, so, in other words, you pass the cost of systems losses to the consumer.
Yes, Mr. President, because these are inherent losses, Mr. President. The engineering characteristics of wires, when you transport or deliver energy, you cannot avoid that you will lose a portion of that power being delivered to the consumers, Mr. President, because of the engineering characteristics of the wires, Mr. President.
So why are we passing this cost to the consumers instead of the same being shouldered by the utilities as part of their cost of operation and doing business?
Mr. President, there are two reasons, Mr. President. Number one is the electric cooperatives do not keep any of the profits. That means they don't have any room to absorb system loss, Mr. President. And number two, Mr. President, there is variability also in system losses, Mr. President. That's why we allow a certain portion or a certain cap for the utilities to charge to customers. In other words, Mr. President, there is little room for utilities to absorb system loss.
Mr. President, can I ask for a 1-minute suspension to attend to some matter previously set? We'll be back shortly.
Session suspended.
But kaya nga nakakapos sila. Busog na eh. Dami kinakain.
Coordination muna. Ano ba yung illegal yun? Yan. Oo nga. Yun na nga, di mo makikita. Sira ulo.
Sige.
Mr. President, we're ready to resume.
Session is resumed.
Yes.
To continue the...
Yes, we are now, yes, but the two gentlemen have been recognized already for interpellation.
Yes, Mr. President, the current cap of systems loss, as we said earlier in the interpretation, is 8.5% for the private distribution utilities and 13% for the electric cooperatives. The bill reduces the maximum systems loss recovery to 5% for private distribution utilities and 10% for the electric cooperatives. Is that correct,
Yes,
Mr.
Mr. President. Yes, Mr.
Now,
President.
how did we come up with this rate, Mr. President? Just for the record.
Yes, Mr. President, before I answer that, Mr. President, I think the good gentleman from Iloilo had a query earlier that why are system losses being passed on to the
Yes.
consumers?
Ah,
And if we
yes.
just go back to the illustration, the simple illustration earlier, slide number 30, Mr. President. If a consumer orders rice from a farmer and they use a transportation to deliver that rice, and along the way, grains of rice will fall, and we can consider that grains of rice as system loss. The farmers will not be the ones paying for those losses because it's the consumers who ordered those rice. So that's why they are now the ones bearing the cost. In the same manner with system loss, Mr. President, the vehicle is actually the utilities, and their job is to just transport electricity. But the consumers are the ones who actually required the X amount of electricity for their homes. So in this case, the generator, which is the farmers, will not be charged. The utilities, which is the transportation, will not be charged, but it ends up in the electricity bill of the consumer, Mr. President. So that's the simple illustration of why system losses are being passed on to the consumer, Mr. President. And to answer the question of the gentleman from Iloilo, Mr. President, again, no, Mr. President, the system loss cannot be zero. No? It's impossible to be zero because it's inherent in transmitting or transporting or delivering electricity to the homes of our consumers. It's a engineering, it's part of engineering that when you transport electricity, somehow it will, some electricity will be lost along the way. And Mr. President, if I, let me just pull out slide number 23, Mr. President. The mandated, this is the evolution of the system loss, Mr. President, for private utility firms. In 1995, the cap was 14.5, and in 1996 is 13.25. In 1997, it's 11.75. In 1998, it's 9.75. Mr. President, if you notice from 1998 to 1999, it's all legislated through RA 7832, Mr. President. And after that, it was reduced further by ERC to 8.5 in 2010, Mr. President. This is for private utility, private distribution utilities. For electric co-ops, slide 24, in 1995, it's 22%. In 1996, it's 20%. In 1997, it's 18. In 1998, it's 16. 1999, it's 14. Again, all of those were legislated through RA 7832. And then in 2010, ERC issued a circular that mandated a 13% reduction, Mr. President. As we speak, Mr. President, for private utility firms like Meralco, they are already hitting 6.5%.
How much? 6.5%.
To be exact, 6.35% system loss, Mr. President. And the logic why we reduced it to 5% is because in many jurisdictions around the world, let me just pull out slide 37, Mr. President. In many jurisdictions around the world, Mr. President, like Japan, it's already 4.4. In Korea, it's already 3.3. In Malaysia, it's already 8.5. So in many jurisdictions, Mr. President, it's already below the 6.35 of Meralco. So, Mr. President, we during the hearing, we consulted the various private utility firms, and they said that 5% system loss is feasible, provided that they will be given the authority to invest in technology. Because, Mr. President, to lower down system loss, you need to invest in technology, and this is the key. No? Technology evolves throughout the years, and if they are given to the authority to invest in technology, they can lower it down to 5%. In the same manner, Mr. President, for electric co-ops, Mr. President, it's the same philosophy. If they are given the authority to invest in technology, they can lower down the distribution loss to a acceptable level, which is 10%, Mr. President. So this is actually a product of the hearings that we conducted over the past year, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for spreading that into the record. Can the good sponsor also spread into the record what is the benefit to the consumer of putting a lower cap on systems loss?
Okay. Mr. President, let me just pull out slide 11, which is the favorite utility of the good gentleman from Iloilo. Panay Electric Company, Mr. President. This is a private utility firm in Iloilo. And assuming we lower down the system loss to 5%, the net savings for a consumer is about 0.02 centavos per kilowatt hour.
That will be reflected in their billing, a reduction?
Yes, that will be reflected in your billing, Mr. President. The monthly savings for an average consumer, because an average consumer consumes about 200 kilowatt hour, Mr. President, is about 4.94 pesos, Mr. President. And the annual savings is about 59 pesos and 28 centavos, Mr. President. To be honest, Mr. President, if you look at the numbers, it's not as big, Mr. President, but inside the bill, we also included provisions for compliance. Because if I go back to the timetable earlier, the last time that the ERC reduced system loss was 2010, 17 years ago, Mr. President. 7 years ago, Mr. President. So we now mandated ERC to always come up with a periodic review every 3 years, so that every 3 years they will look at the system loss being charged, and if warranted, they can lower down system loss, Mr. President.
So assuming that this bill becomes law, let's say by the end of January, just for purposes of debate, when will the consumer feel the cap, feel the savings on their electricity bill as a result of putting a lower cap on what do you call this, on systems loss recovery. Isn't under the bill, is the ERC authorized to set the date when this cap will be effective?
Okay. Mr. President, the ERC is empowered, no, to lower down the system loss cap, Mr. President. But let me just...
Yes, they are authorized to. The way we understand it, the 5% cap and the 10% cap on this private distribution utilities and electric operators, respectively, will be effective on a date determined by the ERC. Is that a correct assumption, reading of the law, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President. Or, Mr. President, we also put a cap on the timetable. If we put up slide 31, Mr. President. Mr. President, the utilities are governed by regulatory periods. And that means that the utilities need to go to ERC to get their rates reviewed. And for Panay Electric in particular, it's October 2023, which is their next regulatory period, Mr. President.
So what does that mean? That the new caps will not be effective until the next regulatory review, which in the case of those private distribution utilities enumerated in the chart, it will be in October of 2023?
At the latest, Mr. President. That's why we put a cap also on the timetable that ERC will implement this new system law. So we empowered ERC to come up with a timetable, but at the latest within the regulatory period prescribed to the different utilities, Mr. President.
Technically, why can we not impose a date in the law itself, Mr. President?
Mr. President, I mentioned earlier that provided the utilities are given the authority to invest in technology, to invest to, for example, replace their wires or invest in system loss reduction programs. This investment depends on the utility, Mr. President. For example, with Meralco, it will take a long time, no, for them to roll out that technology. It really depends on the size and the scope of the utility. So that's why we put in two mechanisms to regulate the timetable. Number one is we authorize ERC to prescribe the timetable for them to implement this new system loss cap. But if they will need a longer period because of, for example, executing a specific technology, then it should fall within the regulatory period as prescribed by law, Mr. President.
Yes.
Mr. President, let me just put emphasis that after prescribing the mandated system loss, Mr. President, it will not be instant because they need to invest. No?
Sorry?
They need to invest in technology,
Yes.
Mr. President. So,
But that's why you have incentives here, because they have to invest.
yes, Mr. President. So it really depends on the type of utility. If the utility is small, then definitely they can replace the whatever they need to replace to lower down system loss cap. Normally, it's technology and an engineering activity. But if the utility is sizable, such as Panay Electric, Meralco, Cepalco in Cagayan de Oro, they will need an ample amount of time to execute that technology, Mr. President. So what we did is we empowered the ERC to determine the time frame, the reasonable time frame that they need to execute that technology to lower down system loss, but it should not go beyond the regulatory period of that specific utility, Mr. President.
Of course, it is entirely possible that we impose the individual systems loss cap on specific utilities whose franchise will be up for review.
Yes, Mr. President, definitely.
We can do that.
Nothing bars the Congress from imposing a special provision on the franchise
Yes.
on different matters, whether system losses or other technical provisions, Mr. President. Yeah. We can insert that, actually. In fact, I remember in the smart franchise, Mr. President, when we tackled it here, this representation inserted a provision there that they will allow mobile portability number, no? So that when the time comes, the smart will not oppose a mobile portability scheme imposed by the government.
Now, the systems loss cap is the maximum that may be authorized to be recovered.
Yes, Mr. President, but we also included a provision here, what we call a individualized system loss cap.
That was what I was going to.
Right.
Why are we allowing that? Doesn't that give so much discretion to the RC? And you know how business is, where they can make more on their bottom line, where they can save on certain areas. Public interest sometimes becomes secondary. So why are we allowing individualized systems loss cap, which with all the inherent concerns, as you know, with so much discretion given to the DRC, a few $1,000 here and there can result in a lot of savings on the part of the distribution utilities. Would the gentleman be amenable to removing the individual systems loss cap so that everybody will be following a maximum?
Actually, Mr. President, that was my initial proposal, to just have the cap and let the utilities comply with the cap, Mr. President. However, Mr. President, during the course of the hearings and the consultations that we did, it almost took us about a year to do all of these consultations, Mr. President. And let me just pull out slide number 14, Mr. President. We consulted various private utilities, Mr. President. And I mentioned earlier that the utilities need to invest in order to reach that cap. No? They need to invest in technology to reach that cap. And by running a simulation on various utilities, Mr. President, sometimes the investment is so big that it will not generate net savings for the consumers, Mr. President, because of different characteristics of the utilities, Mr. President. I'll give you a very specific example, Mr. President. If you look at number 2, Cabanatuan Electric Light Systems, Mr. President, because of its huge land area, you know, and some of the land area, some of the houses are in the mountains or in remote areas, they still need to put put wires to deliver electricity to those houses. However, it may not be profitable, Mr. President. No? So, in short, Mr. President, the investment might not be economical to impose the 5% cap on private utilities, and the end result will will create losses for the consumers, Mr. President. So,
create losses for the
consumers, Mr. President, no? Because it will not generate what we call the net savings for the consumers, Mr. President. So it's a cost-benefit. Basically, it's a cost-benefit analysis, and that's why we empowered ERC to study carefully the cost-benefit analysis, subject to, of course, the technology that the utilities will use. If the technology is, it's the job of ERC to determine the cost of that technology, and the ERC should make sure that the technology is within a reasonable price, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I guess the obvious question is, if the private utilities or the electric cooperatives would not comply with the system's loss cap, what's the penalty?
Mr. President, for private utilities, they have to absorb it. It will be part of their cost, part of their expense.
Okay.
So the private utilities will now have to shoulder, out of their profits, the non-compliance to the system loss cap, Mr. President. So in short, Mr. President, as a rule, we have a system loss cap, but we are now putting pressure on the utilities to justify if they are allowed to be in the individualized system loss cap. Right now, Mr. President, there's no pressure, for the utilities to justify their high system loss cap. They can just charge the consumers. Basta within that cap that the ERC preside, they can just charge the consumers, Mr. President.
There is no reward or incentive for efficiency.
Nothing at all, Mr. President. So, other than incentive, this proposal is actually putting a lot of pressure to the utilities to lower it down, and a lot of pressure to the utilities to justify if they want to be part of the individualized system loss cap.
A part of the system's loss is due to pilferage or tampering of meters. Is that a correct premise?
Yes, Mr. President. Let me just pull out slide.
You seem to have all the slides for every
Yes, Mr.
question
President. I came prepared, Mr. President.
Which is good because it's very informative.
Okay, Mr. President. Slide number 3.
Okay.
You can divide system loss, Mr. President,
Yes.
into 2 categories. The
Yes.
technical system loss, which is inherent. This is a engineering question, Mr. President.
Yes.
And slide number 4 is technical system loss, Mr. President. And this is basically caused by human intervention. Pilferage, mga jumper po, Mr. President. As of this point, Mr. President, ERC cannot distinguish these 2 system losses, Mr. President. And that's also part of the bill that we will now mandate utilities to submit or to segregate the 2 system losses, mandate ERC to analyze the 2 system losses, because now they can have a mechanism wherein they can allow the non-technical to be passed on or to be not passed on to the consumers, Mr. President.
Yeah. So what is the incentive of the utilities, whether private or cooperatives, to lower their systems losses?
Actually, Mr. President, there's no financial incentives for the utilities. For example, if you mandate a 5% cap for private, and they hit 4%, they don't keep anything, from that savings. But what this bill intends to propose is to put pressure, so they will not go beyond the 5%. The savings, actually, if they go below 5%, is passed on to the consumers.
Consumer, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the ERC cannot fix a systems loss cap higher than 5%.
No, Mr. President. No, Mr.
But
President.
in the case of individualized systems, in the case of individualized systems loss cap, they are allowed to do so.
They're allowed to do so, Mr. President, but only in certain circumstances, and when the utilities will have to justify the conditions why they should be included in the individualized system loss, Mr.
So
President.
how many utilities enjoy that individualized system cap loss, which I assume is higher than what is allowed under the present regulation? Who are these utilities who were able to justify a systems cap loss which is higher than the present, I assume the present 8.5% for private distribution utilities and 13% for electric cooperatives? Meron ba? First of all, before you answer that, when we say individualized systems loss cap, that means higher than the maximum allowed.
Yes, Mr.
Okay,
President.
so okay, my premise is correct. Who are now the utilities who enjoy that privilege of having a systems loss cap higher than 8.5% for private distribution and 13% for electric cooperatives?
Let me just
What slide is that?
let me just rephrase, Mr. President. The good gentleman from Iloilo wants to know how many electric utilities
Yes,
who are beyond the current caps.
right, and who are authorized to do so by the authority of the ERC because they have an individualized systems loss cap.
Okay, Mr. President, slide number 9.
Meron nga pala, 9.
Okay, meron po.
Sige. Yeah.
Okay. Currently, Mr. President, the system loss is 8.5. And those who are beyond 8.5, there are 2 private utilities. Okay.
Okay.
8.5, lesser than 8.5 is 17 utilities.
Which is good, actually.
Okay. And what we propose is a 5%. There's only 1 utility is compliant to that as of this point, Mr. President. But that doesn't mean, Mr. President, that they cannot comply. Because that 17, or 17 plus 2, the 19 utilities will have to invest in technology in order to reach that 5%, Mr. President.
Yes.
As I mentioned earlier, Meralco is already hitting at 6.35%. So the key here, Mr. President, is allowing the utilities to invest so that the 2 and the 17 utilities can now comply with the 5% cap, Mr. President.
And it requires capital
Yes,
investment.
Mr. President. It
Like
requires
newer
capital.
distribution lines.
It really depends, Mr. President, on the utilities. No, some of them will have to invest in transformers. Some of them will have to invest in technology, in software, and some of
Basta
them.
kailangan ng investment.
Basta kailangan po ng investment.
Baka dyan tayo mahirapan because ayaw na mag-invest, gusto na dividendo eh.
This is where the law will come in because they will now have to comply with the 5%
Yes, yes.
cap, Mr. President.
That is why I have no objection to your bill, Mr. President. In fact, it's consumer friendly. It's, it's for the benefit of the consumer. We just hope that the distribution utilities, both cooperatives and private, would find its way to complying with these standards once this bill becomes law. And we congratulate the good sponsor for taking time to do this very technical work on systems loss. And we will be looking at it again from the point of view of strengthening this bill, if any, which we will introduce, if any, at the period of amendments. In the meantime, we have no further questions on this measure, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you, Vice President, and we would welcome suggestion that will strengthen the bill or will make sure that the bill fulfills its mandate, Mr. President.
Mr. President, next, Senator Risa Ontiveros.
Senator Ontiveros is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President and Majority Leader. My greater interest in the bill was piqued by a question of the Minority Leader and the response of the good sponsor. So I am wondering, Mr. President, if, and then subject to possible proposal of an amendment at the proper time, if the good sponsor would welcome additional language to the current language of the bill to reflect that an objective of the bill in relation to the earlier discussion on what is the gain to the public utilities of observing the caps, and the response of the good sponsor that there's no monetary gain, but there are other forms of gains. If the good sponsor would be open to an amendment at the proper time to reflect that an additional objective of the bill is to enhance the public good aspect of utilities, including electricity, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, we would be more than happy to listen and receive some suggestions on how to improve the bill. Definitely, Mr. President, we have a lot of, we can get a lot of new ideas and good ideas from the good sponsor, from the good gentle lady from Akbayan, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, good sponsor, and thank you, Mr. President.
If the sponsor will allow, can a few questions from the chair?
Yes, Mr. President.
To help me understand the concept. A technical system loss cannot be avoided.
Cannot be avoided,
Yes.
Mr. President. It's
That
inherent in the wire.
That's scientific fact.
Scientific, engineering scientific.
What does science tell us? How low? How low can we bring it down? What is the absolute percentage when it is no longer feasible to bring system loss below that scientific reality?
Let me just pull out again, Mr. President, 37, slide 37, Mr. President. In many jurisdictions, no, even the most advanced jurisdictions, the lowest is 3.3, which is Korea. It can never be zero, Mr. President.
Yes, yes.
It can never be zero. So it really
Singapore
depends.
is a 2.
And
once upon a-
Singapore. Singapore. No,
And
I'm
once
sorry, Singapore is the lowest, Mr. President.
Is that correct? Once upon a time, Singapore in 2013 was able to bring it down to 0.5.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President. Singapore is 2, Mr. President. And 0.5 at one point in time, Mr. President.
My point is, so there's still a possibility that if this bill becomes law, that law can still be amended by bringing the 5% further down.
It depends, Mr. President, on the cost and benefit analysis. Definitely, you can bring it down as much as you can, but you have to invest. No, you have to invest heavily. And most often than not, when you invest a big amount of money, it will not deliver net savings to the consumers. No? So, in other words, Mr. President, we have to balance the investment and also what is the most optimal, no, savings to the consumers.
Yes, this bill teaches us the mechanism to do that. And if this bill will prove to be successful, in the future, it can be followed. Maybe with new technology, it can be done.
Yes, Mr. President. And now it will mandate ERC to study system losses every 3 years.
But science does not tell us an absolute number where it is impossible now to bring system loss below that number.
No, it will only give us ranges, Mr. President. It will only guide the regulator as to what is the possible system loss for the country. But again, we included in the bill a compliance provision wherein ERC should review every 3 years the system loss caps, considering what type of technologies are out there, what other countries are doing, and the trends in the global power industry, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Sponsor, for accommodating my questions. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1623.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
I move that we proceed with the reference of business, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved. Secretary, let us resume the reference of business.
House number 286, creating an additional branch of the Regional Trial Court in Mountain Province to be stationed in Parasilis.
To the Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Finance.
6759, declaring the diocesan shrine of St. John the Baptist Church, also known as the Taong Putik Dambana in San Juan Bautista, in Bibiclat, Aliaga, Nueva Ecija, a pilgrimage site and tourist destination, providing for its development.
To the Committees on Tourism and Finance.
6780, declaring November 22 of every year a special non-working holiday in Sultan Kudarat in commemoration of its founding anniversary.
Continue.
6781, declaring July 31 of every year a special non-working holiday in Tangalan, Aklan as Tangalan Day. 6782, declaring April 27 of every year a special non-working holiday in Lapu-Lapu, Cebu in honor of the heroism of Lapu-Lapu.
To the Committee on Local Government.
6798, declaring the Candon City Ecotourism Zone Palakapak, San Andres, Kubuot, and Amgid in Candon, Ilocos Sur, a tourist destination, providing for its development.
To the Committees on Tourism and Finance.
6820, declaring July 23 of every year a special non-working holiday in the city of Batangas, province of Batangas, as Batangas City Foundation Day.
To the Committee on Law and Government.
6915, an act establishing a branch of the Polytechnic University of the Philippines in the municipality of Sablayan, province of Occidental Mindoro, to be known as the Polytechnic University of the Philippines Sablayan branch, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committee on Rules.
6920, establishing a national high school in Bignay, Valenzuela City, to be known as this Disciplina Village Bignay National High School.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, and Finance.
6932, declaring the province of Southern Leyte a tourism zone.
To the Committees on Tourism and Finance.
165, an act authorizing the sale of parcels of land in Barangay Cruz, Naligas, Quezon City to its legitimate and qualified residents, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 9500, otherwise known as the University of the Philippines Charter of 2008.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, and Urban Planning, Housing, and Resettlement.
6605, providing for the establishment of an indigenous training center in Kidapawan, North Cotabato.
To the Committees on Cultural Communities and Finance.
6758, declaring Mount Bulaylay in Cuyapo, Nueva Ecija as a tourist destination, providing for its development. 6795, declaring the Ponta Diwata in Binapor, Carmen, Agusan del Norte a priority tourism site. 6796, declaring the Mapaso Hot and Cold Springs in La Paz, Santiago, Agusan del Norte a priority tourism site. 6797, declaring the Lantawan Eco Park in San Roque and crossing Kitcharao, Agusan del Norte a priority tourism site. 6799, declaring Santiago Cove in Santiago, Ilocos Sur a tourist destination, providing for its development. 6800, declaring Pinsal Falls in Santa Maria, Ilocos Sur a tourist destination, providing for its development. 6801, declaring the Tagnote Falls, Mount Hilong Park in Remedios T. Romualdez, Agusan del Norte a priority tourism site.
To the Committees on Tourism and Finance.
6917, converting the Mamagum Elementary School in Mamagum, Sultan, Naga de Mapuro, Lanao del Norte into an integrated school to be known as Mamagum Integrated School. 6918, establishing a national high school in Panay, Daco, Clarin, Misamis Occidental to be known as Filen Sevilla Uaminal National High School. 6919, converting the Mabuhay Elementary School in Mabuhay, Sultan, Naga de Maporo, Lanao del Norte into an integrated school to be known as Mabuhay Integrated School. 6921, establishing a national high school in Tarlac, Ambagyo, Nueva Vizcaya to be known as Tiblac National High School.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, and Finance.
6927, declaring the province of Misamis Oriental a tourism development area. 6928, declaring Mainit Falls and Hot Springs in Brooks Point, Palawan a tourist destination, providing for its development.
To the Committees on Tourism and Finance.
6929, declaring Lanao del Norte a tourism development area and creating the Lanao del Norte Provincial Tourism Council. 6930, declaring the Bakhawan Eco Park in New Busuang, Kalibo, Aklan an ecotourism zone.
To the Committees on Tourism, Environment and Natural Resources, and Finance.
Bills on first reading. Senate number 1667, an act institutionalizing community-based monitoring system in all barangays, appropriating funds therefore and other purposes. Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy Binay.
To the Committees on Social Justice, Welfare and Rural Development, Local Government, and Finance.
1668, an act establishing the Philippine Defense University System and for other purposes. Senator Emmanuel Manny Pacquiao.
To the Committees on National Defense and Security, Education, Arts and Culture, and Finance. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move to adjourn the session until 3 o'clock the afternoon of Tuesday, January 30, 2018.
Is there any objection? There being none, session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, January 30, 2018.